I'm Anne, a compulsive overeater. Like you, I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the gray sheet, write them down, call them into my sponsor. Don't eat between meals no matter what, and am a grateful, recovering compulsive overeater. I say the word recovering because it is hard to believe. I'm about 170 days into this phase of recovery. I've been here before. I'm what's known as a retread. I've been abstinent on the gray sheet, lost the weight, and then gone out for many years. I'll tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I was overweight my whole life. My first memory is of somebody giving me a sweet thing when I was a very little kid. The little old lady next door gave me a sweet thing, and I remember, and she did it secretly. I don't know why, and I loved it. And unfortunately, I come from a family of compulsive overeaters. My father once went on a diet. My mother never went on a diet. I just thought that I was fat. I just thought that's the way I was. I didn't know that it had anything to do with eating. I mean, I vaguely had an inkling that there was something that it had to do with eating, but I didn't realize that my eating could, if it were different, that I wouldn't be fat. I was always chubby. I wasn't super fat, but I was always the fattest kid in the class, and the kid who everybody teased for being the fattest kid in the class. I grew up in a Hollywood milieu, in a very in a sort of wealthy environment with lots of people who were very sleek and slim and well dressed and had lots of money to buy beautiful clothes. Unfortunately, my mother hated that environment and apparently did everything she could to keep me away from it, which meant feeding me, stuffing me, giving me more and more food, never suggesting that I had a problem with food, etc. So that lasted throughout my young years. When I went to college, or even before then, when I was in high school, it occurred to me that diets could help, perhaps. So I tried many, and of course, I tried billions of diets that never worked because I'm a total dyed-in-the-wool compulsive overeater. I had no concept that I was a compulsive overeater. It's just, that's the way I was. I just ate all the time. I remember at one point in college, there was a store that sold frozen goodies that we don't eat near the campus, and it opened at 11 in the morning, and I would be there every day at like 10:59 to get my hit of that food and eat it as I walked to class. I had no idea what I was doing to myself. I just thought, well, I'm fat, and it's just a horrible fate. I remember saying to my mother once as a young teenager, Mom, I'm fat, and I'm afraid boys aren't going to like me, and I don't know what to do. And she said, oh, no, dear, don't worry about it. When you get older, boys won't care what you look like. They'll just like you for yourself and for your intellect. You know, it never translated into, there's a problem here. We have to stop eating like this, because my parents were compulsive eaters. My mother would never have stopped eating unless, and I tried, once I got into OA, I did try to 12-step her, and of course she was like, are you kidding me? So that was what my life was like throughout college, throughout the beginnings of my working life. People were always saying to me, when I'd go out with a guy, they would always say, you know, why don't you go on a diet? When I started working, the people I worked with said, you know, I have some friends who have had a really great success with this program called Overeaters Anonymous. You know, why don't you try it? And I'd be like, ew, no, that's disgusting. I did finally try it. And unfortunately, the meeting I went to, I was living in New York at the time. The meeting I went to was a meeting where there were a lot of negative pitches. I just unfortunately happened to walk in on a meeting like that. And that was the end of it. They were talking about God and there were negative pitches and it was like, get me out of here. So it took many years before I ventured back into another OA meeting. But this was at a time when OA was really basically gray sheet. Not quite, but almost. People ate off the gray sheet. At that point, I was living in Los Angeles, and I people at work would be like, "Anne, please, you have to do something. You have a problem." So I went to an OA meeting, and lo and behold, I was struck abstinent. It was incredible. It was fantastic. It was great. It was positive pitches. It was wonderful, and I got really involved in OA, and I sponsored people, and I was eating basically off the gray sheet. Not always, but because you didn't have to, but it really worked for me, really worked for me. And the 12 steps worked for me. And that was when I tried to 12-step my mother, and don't forget it. And then I moved. And I moved to another city where, unfortunately, the program didn't work for me. I discovered that the OA program was different in different cities in terms of the strength of the members of the program. And so I left the program, of course, gained all the weight, ate my way through the next several years, moved again to New York, and found Gray Sheet. I can't remember exactly how. I was desperate. I found Gray Sheet because I had experienced at that point, trying valiantly to go to OA meetings, that they weren't for me. They didn't work. There wasn't a strong program. I found Gray Sheet, and I was struck abstinent again. It was fantastic. I became super active in Gray Sheet. I lost the weight. Everything was great. And then I stopped. I don't know why. I actually do not know what it was that made me pick up. I have no idea. I just did. And that then led to many years of trying to do Gray Sheet. Then I realized Gray Sheet was the only program that worked for me. There's no way I can do anything else. It doesn't work. I really wish it did. Many years, like 20 years of eating, of being out there. And, but for some reason, partly because I have to have a hip replacement operation. And I was told, like, you got to lose weight for that, or your recovery will be much more difficult. I started hemming and hawing and pondering going back to Gray Sheet. It took me a couple of months before I went, okay, I have to do it. I have to. And so I looked it up online, and I found a Gray Sheet meeting. And once again, I was struck abstinent. I've never had the problem that many people have of many day ones and having to fight and white knuckle it. It's always been, I hear the truth and I go for it. The question has been, how much do I surround myself with the other Gray Sheeters, how much service do I do? How much do I participate in all the Zoom meetings? I often go to meetings and don't talk. Since I've been back, it's been all Zoom, which is actually great because I don't have to drive everywhere. I live in a town called Santa Rosa that is, like 50 miles from San Francisco. It's a drive to get to a lot of meetings. So anyway, I've been abstinent on the Gray Sheet since March 11th. I've dropped a bunch of weight. I haven't dropped all of it. And I realized that I've never reached my goal weight, like with anything ever. with any diet, with any OA, with any gray sheet. I've never reached it. Even the last time around when I was thin and buying clothes. Thank you. Buying clothes like there was no tomorrow and feeling incredibly good, incredibly good. I realize now that that was not even at my goal weight, because yesterday was weigh day and I had to sort of, look, and I read some stuff online from people and I had to assess, well, how much more do I have to go before I can change my food plan to be on maintenance. I've never reached maintenance ever in anything. And you know what? I have a long way to go. I really have a long way to go to a real goal. My goal was always high because it was like, I couldn't possibly ever weigh, X, but Y will do, Y is fine. I'll go for that. Anyway, so that's my situation. I want to say a little more about, in the olden days, I always loved it when people talked about what it was like. And so I wanted to say a little more about what it was like, because once I became abstinent this time around, it's like I had to look in the mirror, literally and figuratively, and literally it doesn't look great to me, and figuratively doesn't look great either. I see that I have such a distorted view of myself and food and my relationship to other people, mostly men, because my whole life men were always either rejecting me or telling me like, yeah, could you please like lose 20 pounds like immediately? There's like, and this was like when I was in college and stuff, there was no such thing as, equality of men and women. I had no power. I felt I had no power over these guys. I didn't understand that I could say, look, screw off here, or to talk to them about this problem. I was just so humiliated. And my, before I became abstinent, my life was a never-ending series of humiliations. It's like I always felt humiliated and shameful. And now I realize, I know from my first experiences with being abstinent, that even on day one, I don't feel that same humiliation and shame, because I know that I'm taking care of myself. I know I'm doing for myself with my higher power. I know that I'm doing everything I can do. I'm having the courage to change the things that I can, and I'm knowing that they can be changed. That for me was an issue in my, as you can tell, that was an issue in my family. There was no concept of wanting to be socially acceptable or not to eat constantly. It wasn't happening in my family. And there's also quite a bit of mental illness in my family. My parents were both depressed, but I have both a brother and a sister who are severely mentally ill. My sister died a couple of years ago. Her whole life was spent as a really disturbed, compulsive overeater. My brother, who's mentally ill, unfortunately, okay, 1 minute, obsesses everything he talks about, which he's crazy and he talks a lot of that stuff, is food. So being with him and talking to him is very difficult, but I do it. So I just want to let you know where I come from, where I'm going. I'm not that far along the path, but I feel like I have a clear sense of what I'm doing, and that feels really, really good. So thank you for being there, and don't eat no matter what.